Welcome to the Purposepreneur Podcast with K. Francis Smith.
Hey everybody, this is K. Francis Smith, the Purposepreneur, and I want to welcome you to the Purposepreneur Show. Here we cover business and purpose. And if you're one of those people who are serious about your purpose or serious about business or just want to know what this thing about purpose is all about, right? You're in the right place. You're watching the right show. And you need to tell somebody else about it, because life is all about purpose. Everything ever created has a purpose. You are no different. For the past 3 weeks, this is week 3, we're covering a man named Steve Jobs, an innovator, a world changer. I often ask myself, what would the world be like if Steve Jobs was still alive? One of those people who are just special. Some people are just special people. They're meant to have a serious impact on the world. They're not ordinary. They're going to stand out. They're going to make sure they leave their mark on the world. And the late, great Steve Jobs was one of those people. I don't get much into people's personal lives, but this is more about his business life with Apple. Some of the transitions there with Pixar, Next, those sorts of things, and his transition back into Apple. We left off in the last episode where he had kind of gotten fired from his own company, which is amazing to me. How you let somebody put you out of your own company? Now, see, that's the brother coming out, because at the end of the day, hey, look, that's a tough one. That's a tough one to swallow. And he went on and took that, swallowed that pill. That's a tough pill to swallow. Went ahead, purchased a company called Pixar. Ended up doing Toy Story, came out a billionaire. Come on, somebody. Did a company called Next, and that's where we're going to pick it up. He did another company, a tech company called Next. And there's one thing about being brilliant. Whenever you are brilliant, no one can take your brilliance from you. Listen to me. You've got something so special, so unique, that no matter who fires you, no matter who leaves you alone, listen, they can't stop you if you just keep going. Continue to develop, continue to create, continue to innovate, and you'll be surprised at what you can come up with. This man came up with not one hit, 2 hits. It's almost as if them releasing him was the biggest blessing he could have ever received. So let's check out this story about the dreamer who changed the world, Mr. Steve Jobs, and let's check out this transition back into Apple after 10 years. Let's go.
It had been more than 10 years since Steve Jobs had been fired from Apple, and the drama and turmoil at the company continued to get worse.
After Steve left the company, it lost its compass, lost its mission. It lost its founding spirit. Its products got old and stale, and during that whole period, Microsoft had gotten stronger and stronger.
Computers running Windows accounted for nearly 80% of the market. Apple's market share could not break 11%. And their ousted co-founder was sitting on an operating system that could save them.
They wanted Next's operating system.
In an ironic and stunning turn of events, Apple Computer bought Next for over $400 million.
We're going to be building our next generation operating system on Next technology.
Selling Next to Apple, well, that's sheer genius. You just have to say, wow.
Steve Jobs returned to the company he helped create and became interim CEO.
And so there began what I think is the greatest turnaround in the history of corporate America.
It was his finest hour and brought things back together again around a cohesive vision, because he came in as the rainmaker.
He called a big meeting in this big meeting room, and he says, you know what's wrong with this company? And everyone's too scared to answer, no one will say anything, and he goes, the products suck. They've got no sex in them.
The comeback included a remarkable announcement. Bill Gates, who had long been considered Jobs' main rival, would invest in Apple Computer.
Microsoft invested $150 million in Apple to help save the day. That must have been the low point for Apple.
I happen to have a special guest with me today via satellite downlink. And if we could get him up on the stage right now.
Okay, so after 10 long years, 10 years. Now you figure after 10 years, you've moved on. Life is so different. After 10 years, listen, man, I don't want to be bothered. I figure after 10 years, we're both doing better without each other. Life has gone on. And if you are a drowning company, that's what you get. You should have never lost the best thing that ever happened to you. But there's a strange thing that happens when it's your baby. Strange things happen when it's your creation. Strange thing happens on the inside of you when it's something that you really care about. And guess what happened for Steve Jobs? He goes out, creates a company called Next. Next is doing well on its own. He's already made $1 billion with Pixar. It's 10 years later. And guess what? Apple is crumbling. They've lost they call it their founder's spirit, their founding spirit, which is Steve Jobs. It's his spirit, right? It's his brainchild. It's his creation. They've lost daddy. And when you lose daddy, you don't lose the company, but you will lose the DNA of the company. So they lose the DNA of the company. They go and watch. This is so gangster. This right here is totally gangster. He sells the operating system. Now he's got this operating system that can change their entire situation. He sells it to Apple for $400 million. Wait 1 second. 10 years ago, I'm not worth spit to you. 10 years ago, you want to throw me out with the bathwater, but now, 10 years later, you want to pay me, not for me, for my operating system. Woo, baby, baby. Back then they didn't want me. Now I'm hot, they all on me. How you like me now? Now that's some old school Kumo D, but listen to me. 10 years later, man, it's amazing what time can do. Somebody's going through their time cycle now, and you're becoming worth more. You're becoming more valuable with time. Don't worry about what it was. Worry about what it is and what it's going to be, because Steve Jobs came back and they made him the interim CEO of the company that he once founded and once was booted out of by the board and Mr. Pepsi-Cola president. They put him out, and now they need him back because they realize, even though he was a pain in the backside, even though he had a sense of entitlement, he was very privileged, he was a spoiled brat, he was screaming, making noise, kicking and ranting and raving, he was worth every dime. Some people are just worth their salt. Some people are worth their weight in diamonds. He's one of those special people. So he comes on back in there. And now they're still in the hole. Watch. They're still in the hole, so they got to make a move. They've got to make a move. And their kind of hole is not like a 1 or 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 or 15 million problem. If they've got a $50 million problem, that's not a problem. Their problems are $100 million problems, so they've got to solve it. Boy, oh boy, do they solve it? Let's see how they solve their problem. Apple, who are we going to partner with today? Let's see what the solution is.
Next, we have taken a look at browsers out there, and Apple has decided to make Internet Explorer its default browser on the Macintosh. Since we believe in choice,
the speech was sounding like a surrender statement.
And lastly, Microsoft is making an investment in Apple. Microsoft is buying $150 million worth of Apple stock at market price. It is non-voting shares, and they've agreed.
Notice the key word here, non-voting. Microsoft wasn't trying to acquire Apple. Instead, it was just funding it. But it wasn't just cash that Bill Gates was offering.
The second part of this is Microsoft is committing to release Microsoft Office on Macintosh for the next 5 years.
The issue with software I mentioned earlier that was basically bringing Apple down was being solved by Bill Gates single-handedly. No one would ever purchase an Apple computer without Microsoft Office on it, and here is Bill Gates giving it away for shares at market price, which he could have just purchased off of the market. So why did Bill Gates do it? Why save Apple on the eve of what would have been their death at the hands of Microsoft? Well, as you probably guessed, Bill Gates wasn't doing this out of the kindness of his heart. In fact, back then, Bill Gates had a rather negative reputation. He wasn't really into philanthropy yet. Instead, he was seen as a cutthroat businessman willing to do anything to succeed in his industry. And by all accounts, Microsoft was successful. So successful, in fact, that it was attracting the attention of antitrust regulators. The Department of Justice had been preparing its case against Microsoft since 1993, and obviously, Bill didn't want his company broken up. So what better way to show that Microsoft isn't a monopoly than by literally propping up his competition? Less than a year after the Apple partnership, the DOJ summoned Bill Gates for a painstaking 3-day-long deposition. By the way, you can tell a lot about someone based on how they act during these things.
Did you ever have any discussions with any representative of Real Networks concerning what products Real Networks should or should not offer or distribute? No.
Notice how long he takes before giving an answer, carefully considering how his responses could be used against him.
A program designed to assist in the performance of a specific task, such as word processing, accounting, or inventory management.
I'd say it's a pretty vague definition.
Is it accurate as far as it goes?
I'd say it's vague but accurate.
Throughout the deposition, he'd attack definitions and remain as vague as possible, because he knew that by saving Apple a year earlier, he had really saved Microsoft. The DOJ, of course, eventually gave up, and in 2001 cleared Microsoft with minimal punishments. And as to what happened with the Apple shares Microsoft had, well, Bill Gates got rid of them as soon as they had served their purpose. Once the Department of Justice had settled with Microsoft, Bill Gates converted his preferential, non-voting Apple shares into regular stock. In total, he ended up with 18.2 million shares of Apple, which he sold in 2003. Now keep in mind, this was after the dot-com bubble had crashed, and in 2003, Apple's stock price was still extremely low compared to its pre-bubble heights. So just how much money did Bill Gates miss out on? Well, Apple has been performing so well since 2003 that its stock has split twice in that time, once at a 2-to-1 ratio in 2005 and a second time at a 7-to-1 ratio in 2014. Thus, the 18.2 million shares then would be 254 million today. As of August 2018, Apple's stock price is roughly $210 apiece, which would make Microsoft's former stake be worth $53.5 billion today.
Now we know that the solution to every problem we have is the right person. So for Apple, the right person was Steve Jobs. They bought the operating system from Next from the one and only Steve Jobs for $400 million, but that wasn't enough. They needed more resources, they needed more innovation, and they needed something else. And they went to who they believed was the perfect solution, who was a competitor. Not only a competitor, he had his foot on their neck. He was driving them out of the business, running the industry, and they looked at him as a tyrant. That man is Bill Gates, who we will cover on another series of episodes. Man, another genius, another special individual. But listen to me. Sometimes some of your biggest solutions are trapped inside of the people you don't like that much, and you got to get over yourself. You've got to learn not to take yourself that seriously. When Steve Jobs introduced Bill Gates at this reveal, the people gasped. How could you? Well, collaboration is good. I was speaking to somebody today, and you know what I told them? We were talking about some real estate. He wants to do some partnership. And I said, listen, I have no problem partnering with you. My only challenge is you keep talking about your end. And it doesn't seem like you're into a partnership. It seems like you want to use me to buy freedom. Let me help you. I was in partnership this morning when I woke up. I didn't make the soap that I used. I didn't make the shower that I walked into. I didn't create the bed I slept in, the floor that I walked on. I didn't create the clothes that I'm wearing. I didn't make them either. I didn't create the car that I partnered with so many people to get to where I am right now. There are people running cameras, producers. There are sound people. There are people on 3 different cameras and someone running sound and MacBooks and all kinds of iMacs. Oh man, am I giving Apple shout outs for free? Are you kidding me? But I'm partnering. You have to partner because no one gets it done alone. Life is a huge partnership and you've got to learn how to pick the right teammates. Here he is picking a brilliant man. Who better than the person who is your nemesis, who thinks like you but didn't get ousted from his own company? There are some people you should partner with and they're not better than you. They just made less mistakes than you made. Some people make too many mistakes to be at the helm. Wait a minute, I'm teaching now. There are certain, you know what? I love what Chris Rock said. And he said this, he said, there are some fields where you can't afford to make certain mistakes. Chris Rock said it best about police brutality. He said that there are some jobs that you can't afford to have bad apples. He said American Airlines can't be like, most of our pilots like to land planes. We just got a few bad apples that like to crash into mountains. No, sometimes you have to learn how to not make mistakes. When you're operating in certain space, mistakes are crucial. They can cost you everything. There are some things you just can't fix, right? So we have to learn that there are some fields where you can't afford to make mistakes. There are some times where you can't afford mistakes, particularly when you realize that life is a huge competition. Yes, it is. They lied to you. I'm sorry. They lied to you and they put you in first grade and said, life's not a competition. And then they told you, okay, so go play kickball. Where the object is to beat the other team by kicking the ball as far as you can and running around the bases faster. Before they throw you out, you're supposed to make it to the base, score more points. They told you go play basketball where the object is to beat the other team. They told you to go into a classroom where your objective is to get better grades than everybody else. But then they tell you life's not a competition. Well, if life is not a competition, then why is it when you go to get a job, you have to have an interview? Why is it before you go there, they're sizing you up by your resume and seeing, did you work there longer than them? And what's your educational level? Why is a master's higher than a bachelor's? Why do bachelor's degrees get you a certain level of pay in salary? And a master's get you a certain level. And then why does a doctorate get you a certain level? Why? Why do prices even matter? Why do we even have prices if it's not a competition? How come every time I go to buy a piece of real estate, I've got to get into a bid? What is this about this isn't a competition? That is a lie. I'm here to dispel the myth that life is not a competition. I promise you, there are people smarter than you, sure. You don't have to be the smartest, but you want to be the most consistent. I'm trying to help somebody because they lied to us. They told us life wasn't about competition, and then we spend all of our money watching what? Competitions. So then we get into these positions and we become so lax and so laid back. Not Steve Jobs and definitely not Bill Gates. These guys realized they were in a competition, and Steve Jobs kind of conceded and said, look, man, I understand you're gangster. I'm going to get down or lay down, but here's what I'm going to do. They say if you can't beat them, guess what you got to do? Get on board. Because you can get on board or you can get rolled over. Microsoft had picked up 50% of the market, and Apple could barely get 11%. Come on now. Apple fell off. They forgot where their sauce was. Every place has a secret sauce, and every mall has an anchor store. Every business has an anchorman. Excel, I'm an anchorman. Go to South DeKalb, used to be Rich's. Now it's Macy's is the anchor store. You go to places like Lenox Mall, you've got places like Neiman Marcus, anchor stores. You got to have an anchor. You go right over down the street here in Conyers, they've got a whole plaza with Home Depot and all that, but the anchor store is Walmart. You remove Walmart, you remove the patrons, and you lose what you had. So they go into partnership with Bill Gates. He comes in for $150 million. He buys shares of Apple. $150 million in shares they get, he buys. And then he buys these $150 million. And his motive is revealed that the Department of Justice is coming after Microsoft, and they've been conducting an investigation for years. Watch now about a monopoly. You know you're killing the game when they're coming to you, and they're coming for you because you are killing it so bad that there's not even an inroad for anybody. As a matter of fact, they made Apple put Microsoft Office on all of their devices as a default. Woo! We got to make some noise. I need a horn. Ring the alarm. Bling, 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 bling. Woo, woo, woo. Siren, something. Man, Bill Gates is a bad, bad man. A monopoly? And then they ask him the question, have you ever? He's like, this is a brilliant man. It took him like 3 minutes to answer a simple question. Why? Because the only reason he got involved with Apple was because it saved his Microsoft. Y'all like the way I played that, right? You know, he did not care about Apple as a company, a corporation, because the man, the moment the Department of Justice let him off the hook, he converted his shares, millions of shares, and he sold them like a fire sale. Get this mess, that mess out, get it out of here. We don't want that. We don't care about their shares. Now, these shares that he sold, these millions of shares, 18 plus million shares of Apple stocks would be worth over $50 billion today. And guess what? He didn't care. He didn't care. Why? Because he was in it to get away from the Department of Justice. And once he did, he was good. Washed his hands. He wanted nothing else to do with them. He wanted to get his company in the browser, right? And then he wanted to get his company out of the Department of Justice browser. Know why people want to get in business with you. Know their motives. And for all intents and purposes, this was a win-win for Apple. There was no way they could have lost, right? They were sinking, they were plummeting, and Steve Jobs came in, the brilliant business mind that he is, not just an innovator. It's not enough just to be creative. A creative mind does not a business make. Got it? So we're going to need more than creativity. You're going to need more than intellectual property. You're going to need more than innovation and all of this content. It takes more than content to make a company, right? I've seen people who are great educators try to be a director of a school, and the school gets the bottoms out so bad they end up in legal trouble because they can't pay people. They don't know when to quit. Sometimes you have to know when to cut your losses and move on. Somebody watching me right now, listen to me. You need to cut your losses and move on. Listen to me. Come here. You might need to cut your losses and move on. There might be something else that segues or opens up the gate to what you're trying to do. It might be that you are doing something that this season is not permitting you to do because this isn't the time for what you're trying to do. And as you do something else, you'll learn some things, you'll grow in some ways, and what you'll do is you will come out differently. You'll come out better, you'll come out stronger, and you'll come out more experienced, all right? So we see that it's not always about believing in what somebody's doing or believing that they've got 100% of your interest at heart when doing business. These men both had ulterior motives, both had their selfish reasons for being involved, both had a bit of a compromise that they had to cover and a little bit of overcompensation they needed, so they both served one another's causes, And guess what? At the end of the day, they had no problem sharing that publicly. So let's check out Mr. Steve Jobs sharing his thoughts about Microsoft. I mean, this is from his book, his words, and this is from 60 Minutes. Let's go. Mr. Steve Jobs, tell us what you really think about Bill Gates and Microsoft.
I'd say Microsoft and Google had a lot in common. Microsoft never had the humanities and the liberal arts in their DNA. It was a pure technology company. And they just didn't get it. Even when they saw the Mac, they couldn't even copy it well. How dumb do you have to be to not see it once you see it, you know? But Google's the same way. They just don't get it.
Jobs had had a big fight with Google. He thought Google had ripped him off with the Android operating system. So he gets a call from Larry Page who says, I want to come by. I'm going to become the CEO of Google. I want tips. At first, Steve Jobs said, his instinct was to say, hey, screw you, forget it. You've ripped us off, I'm not going to deal with you. But then Jobs says, I was mentored by the great people of this valley, Packard, Hewlett, all these people who set something in place in Silicon Valley. They were good mentors. So he has Larry Page come by and visit. And he gives him some advice. And one piece of advice is focus. He says, don't be like Microsoft doing products all over the map. Figure out what you do best and keep it focused. Secondly, he says, don't try to be too nice as a CEO. You want a team only of A players. And it really means that at times you're going to have to blow some people off.
He had a lot to say about Google. He had a lot to say about Microsoft. He oddly was pretty favorable about Facebook and Mark Zuckerberg.
We talk about social networks in the plural, but I don't see anybody other than Facebook out there. Just Facebook. They're dominating this. I admire Mark Zuckerberg. I only know him a little bit, but I admire him for not selling out, for wanting to make a company. I admire that a lot. I'd like to announce one of our first partnerships today, and that is one with Microsoft. And I happen to have a special guest with me today via satellite downlink.
When they first met, Jobs was on the top of the world and Gates was sort of just this little software writer. Then that got reversed.
When Steve first came up, it was going to be a lot cheaper computer than it ended up being, but that was fine.
People can sometimes love each other and hate each other at the same time.
And Bill ended up the wealthiest guy around. And if that was his goal, then he achieved it. But it's never been my goal. And I even wonder in the end if it was really his goal. I don't know.
His relationship with Bill Gates is very long and very complicated.
And near the end, a lot of people wanted to come and visit. So Bill Gates calls as he wants to come by. They set something up, and they sit for 3-4 hours just reminiscing. Just talking about being the grand old man of the digital age. But then they also talked about the great difference they had, which was Steve Jobs believing that everything should be connected, end-to-end, integrated tightly. And Gates feeling that that was not a good business model. You should license your software so different manufacturers could make things. And Gates is somewhat generous to him at the end and gracious. And he says, you proved that your model works. And Jobs is rather gracious in return. He says, well, your model of licensing it out, that worked as well. I guess we were both okay. Then, of course, when Gates told me the story and recounted it to me, he said, what I didn't tell Steve was that it only works when you got a Steve Jobs.
All right, frenemies, business enemies, homie, partner, whatever it is, these two epitomized what it is to be sharks in the same tank, in the same water. That's not big enough for the both of us unless we decide to share. There are times where you need to learn how to share, even though it might not make sense 100%. You'll have to give up some of your convictions and some of your idiosyncrasies and hang-ups. But at the end of the day, they made history together. Salute to two generals who changed the IT game, who changed the tech world, changed the world, period. They changed the game, period. All of this stuff we're doing today, an iPhone. I remember being with a company called Fortune High Tech back in 2003. And guess what our big claim to fame was? We're about to come out with the camera phone. It's going to be like the Jetsons. Finna be able to talk on a camera phone. And we weren't even talking about cell phones. We were talking about like house phones. Imagine the innovation, what it took. And then I think it's big that Steve Jobs gave advice to gentleman, the young man that started Google. I mean, telling him, hey man, stay focused, pick A players, big deal, man, that when you change the world, and I'm telling you, you can change the world. Don't let anyone tell you anything differently. Listen, these two antagonized each other, criticized each other, and literally didn't believe in the way that each other conducted business. But guess what? It didn't matter. At the end, they had to conclude, your way worked. Yours did too. I didn't agree with your way. I didn't agree with your way, which tells me you don't even need the greatest to believe or to agree, but you do have to believe in yourself. Listen, this is K. Francis Smith, and I thank you for tuning in today, and I hope you enjoyed this show, and I hope that you learned something, you grew a little bit, you got a little bit closer to your purpose, your destiny, and it is my prayer that all of your dreams become a reality, that you would enjoy success in all that you do, and may you live your life on purpose. I'll see you next Monday at 1 p.m. Till then, stay safe, and please stay sanitized.